Hello, everybody out there. Tonight's topic is the Federal Reserve and President Biden's recent nominations of the Federal Reserve. And my question would be, considering the nature of those nominations and who they involve, has political correctness, climate concerns, and wokeism come to the Federal Reserve? Now, before we get started, let's introduce our two panelists here. We have John Woodford to my left here, who is a longtime editor and reporter for various major publications. And we also have Mark Collinsworth with Vere Financial, who is a professional financial advisor. Now, the way I'm reading this, these are both nominations are heavily fraught with political ideology, which I don't know if it's anything new to the Federal Reserve, but it seems at least different. Now, with Sarah Bloom Raskin, she's nominated by Biden as federal chair for the supervisors of the Federal Reserve Board, and that has a key regulatory role. Also, she's a former Fed governor herself, and she served as a deputy Treasury secretary. So, yeah, she apparently has credentials, but with her, from what I'm reading, and the criticism of her, mainly from the Republicans, is that she's too attached and concerned with climate and what effect the climate will have on the economy. Now, my question would be to either of you, is that the role of the Federal Reserve? And would the decision such that their main role, I guess, the way I understand it, is to have printing money, more or less of it, and raising and lowering interest rates. So how would climate change feed into that? Now, she's saying that you have to consider climate change risk to various companies that the Federal Reserve banks would be lending to. So in other words, when you're lending money to some of these companies, you got to determine ahead of time if they're taking into consideration the risk on their business and product because of climate change. So let's start with Mark. Mark, does that seem at all reasonable or effective to you?
Well, first thing, I think it's absolutely wrong because that's going to cost a lot of people their jobs and so forth. And the second thing, I don't think they can legally do that because any regulations have to be passed by Congress, and the Federal Reserve has to implement those. A case in point, back in 2010, 2011, they passed the God Act to put all these restrictions on banks so another 2008 housing bubble wouldn't occur. Well, if the Federal Reserve had that much power to regulate banks, why do they even have to vote in Congress for the Franken-Dodd Act?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's no logic at all to that, even if there's a questionable legality at this point. Would there be any effect on the economy by the Federal Reserve keeping an eye on which companies are taking the proper risks in terms of climate change? I mean, yeah, would that have an effect?
I think it would. Personally, I think it would have a negative effect if you start cutting off, the lifeline to energy companies. A lot of your cyclical companies that are very tied to, or very sensitive to recessions and so forth. They need those bank line of credits to tap into to stay alive to get through those rough patches. If you start doing that, is it possible the next big recession we have, a company like an Exxon or a Chevron goes out of business?
John, what's your reading on this?
Well, I think it'd be unwise to have a policy that reins in and closes off your tactical moves as a central bank of a country with a limitation like that. It's you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know enough about the future. You don't know which companies are going to even develop. One of these now polluting energy companies may be the one that develops some new kind of invention or process that reverses it or cleans it up. So why are you going to take a huge, historically powerful financial or corporate entity like that and then say that you're going to strangle it, strangle it unless it marches to today's thing that you're supposed to do? I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, some of her critics are saying that what she would do is steer loans and encouragement away from conventional fossil fuel operations, including gas-powered automobiles. But my question would be, until this changeover takes place to all electric, do you really want to defund car companies? Either of you?
No, yeah, right. You don't, no one knows enough about the intricacies of both the economy, let alone the future, uh, to be prescribing things before they occur. So it's sort of virtue signaling in a way. I doubt even, who knows whether she even sincerely believes that she could clean up the atmosphere or whatever she wants to clean up following her advice. I don't think she could possibly know that, but it sounds good. Or maybe she's a zealot. I don't know.
Well,
You
Mark,
wouldn't want someone on the court. You wouldn't want someone at the Federal Reserve who was judging everything that way. That doesn't make sense.
well, Mark, you said a number of times in previous interviews that I've had with you that although you do believe that electric cars are the wave of the future, that wave is going to take some time to reach shore. So in the meantime, you have to stick with fossil fuel and gas-powered engines, do you not?
Correct. I think we're going to be kind of stuck with fossil fuels for the next 10, 15, maybe in 20 years before we even see the EV industry even starting to get a foothold in there. If you put an EV car up against a gasoline powered car, the gasoline powered car can still outrun it and accelerate faster than it can.
Really? That's not what Tesla says with its big sports model. It's supposed to be faster than even Porsches and high-end cars, Lamborghinis and all that, because it's direct drive.
Well, I think Elon Musk sometimes likes to stretch the truth.
Well, there are those Teslas, but then there are these other. Those things cost a mint, but then there are the cars, the electric cars, and hybrid sorts of cars that they have around now. And I don't think those are particularly all that fast. Not only that, they're still trying to figure out the economic cost of operating and maintaining, building, operating, maintaining, and fixing an electric car, what with the battery technology and what it costs to make a battery, how polluting is the battery, what are all those little precious minerals that are hard to find that have to go into these fancy batteries. You don't even know yet the true costs of non-fossil fuel cars.
It's just an example. Biden's picked up Raskin and also Cook, an example of the continuing and increasing emphasis on political considerations rather than the nuts and bolts of how the economy works. Or are they right in saying that political considerations, racial justice, equity, and all that really does play a significant role in the health of the economy?
Well, we know that justice plays a role in how well the economy is going, because not just in racial matters, but even in labor versus management struggles and many conflicts in society where if they're not handled well, or if you have poor laws or unjust laws, you're going to have unstable economic activities in your society. I mean, that's one of the things that the big bank's supposed to do, is have a stable economy as much as possible, which we know is not always possible.
So you're saying that social instability would have an effect on the health of the economy overall. But what do you think of that, Mark?
Can you rephrase the question, please?
In other words, I think if I'm interpreting John correctly, he's saying that social instability would have a direct effect, a negative effect on the economic health of the United States.
I would agree with that. And I kind of use the example that I think, people that have the high skill sets should always get promoted. Give you a great example on how people kind of look at this. I would love to be a famous basketball player, but I can't beat someone like LeBron James. If we use the same analogy, should LeBron James tie one arm behind his back and wear a 100-pound weight so I can more fairly compete against him? I don't think that would be fair. I think, LeBron James would be very against that, even though he's for a lot of liberal policies. I think if you start telling him that kind of stuff, he'd have to play me in basketball with one hand tied behind his back and a 100-pound weight. Probably change his tune.
Yeah, but that might be considered an extreme example. But I mean, what about the basic concept that Biden and his nominees are pushing, that if you have a well-integrated society that's meshing very well and working very well together, that in itself will create a more vigorous economy. So therefore, some of his political correctness picks for the Federal Reserve Board are justified.
I think go ahead, please.
Well, I was going to say they don't know exactly what measure would have to be passed to have any given effect on the economy. We don't know. So, I mean, I think the principles of justice and fair play, I think it goes beyond the Federal Reserve. It's not even in the Federal Reserve's, that's not in their bailiwick to try to figure out policies of that sort, or to be, to have a carrot and stick inside the Federal Reserve. I mean, there are all sorts of other institutions in society where those kinds of conflicts are better worked out and resolved, but not on your money policy. Your monetary policy is, it doesn't respond to that. In fact, people don't even know how to control such. That's why we have every now and then, little problems in our economy, which occur, they say, cyclically, and they have all these people trying to predict when they're going to do it. I mean, these things have nothing to do with I think the social policy, really.
Mark?
I think, I'm going to go back to the fundamental thing of this. I think so much of this is based on politics, trying to appease certain people. I think it's a big mistake. And what really kind of irritates me is looking at stuff like Joe Biden. If you go back, he nominated the first Black woman to be on the Supreme Court. If you look back, 20, 25 years ago, when he was a senator, he voted against Republican nominees of Black women to lower federal courts. And he had a big issue with that. So while all of a sudden he's got this big change and now wants to do this, I mean, it's basically hypocrisy at its max.
He also gave Clarence Thomas a hard time during his.
Not really.
No?
He let Clarence Thomas in.
But
he gave Anita Hill a harder time than he gave Clarence Thomas.
Yeah.
Because Anita Hill was trying to knock Clarence Thomas out essentially as a sex offender, and Joe Biden appeared to be in the beginning going to block him, but then he caved in for whatever reasons, and he didn't let the women who wanted to block Clarence Thomas and expose him, he didn't let them have a say. So he's, he blows every which kind of way. Who knows whatever influences a decision he makes. I don't know, but I mean, you can tell that he's, like many politicians, a hell of a lot richer coming out of politics than he was going into it.
Yeah, how do they make so much money after they leave office? Yeah. Well, the next nominee we should turn to now, which is Lisa Cook, she's getting even more flack on her racial orientation, and she would be the first Black woman nominated at the Federal Reserve Board, and she's elected this year into the Federal Board of Reserves in Chicago. She was also an economist for Obama and a professor of economic and international relations at Michigan State University. Now, she actually wrote an article in the New York Times some time ago where she really spells out this racial concern, where it's headlined, "Racism Impoverishes the Whole Economy." And she argues that from the lost wages of African Americans because of President Woodrow Wilson's segregation of the civil service, to the losses suffered by Black and Hispanic students because of California's ban on affirmative action, to the scarcity of Black girls in higher level high school math courses, and the scope of toll continues to grow and grow. But she's also saying that because Blacks, because of the subjugated position that they were forced into, they didn't have access to filing patents. And that in itself kept the economy much less vigorous than it could have been. Now, to me, that sounds like she's kind of stretching the points on this, but does she have a point? What do you think? What do you think, John?
Well, she has a point, except that I don't think it has anything to do with the Federal Reserve. I mean, her point should be, and it wouldn't go just for black people, poor people, people who are underpaid or low paid or jobless. Those people aren't filing a lot of patents, and often they don't have a lot of good schools to go to either. And while because of our history, this may be true percentage wise for more black people or maybe Hispanic people, I don't know, but it's true of a lot of white people in the country too, could stand to gain from better schools and healthcare and all these other benefits. So I think the only way things are going to go ahead in this country is that they try to have social programs that aid people based on how much they need them, and start with their schools too, schools and childcare, whatever people need, and usually the people know what they need. I know in Mississippi they've got a program where a black woman runs it. She gives maybe $10,000 to unemployed single parent poor women, but that's all they're going to get. And they find that once people have a certain amount of seed money, the people themselves, they don't tell them how they're going to spend it, what to spend it on. People themselves figure out how to, move ahead if that's in them to do it. Some people, of course, might just waste stuff, but you can't. This micromanaging is not going to be successful. But I think what she's describing, you can't have a program that's just going to aid one element in the society, because that kind of turns people against one another, and it also is kind of demeaning, I think, to the people. They think, oh, you need a special helping hand. I would say, to me, the ones who got a real special separate helping hand in this country, as it were the American Indians. They put them on reservations. I don't think for any community being taken out of the general populace and put into anything like a reservation is going to be good for your people in the long run.
It appears that if she got her position on the Federal Reserve, she'd be examining companies for their policies on hiring, on promotions, et cetera, in terms of race. And again, that goes back to the question is, are we talking about qualifications or are we talking about race, which is also coming up with the issue now with Biden's Supreme Court nominees. What do you think, Mark?
I would agree with that, but I also want to throw one quick thing in here before we get on that. Some people, from people I've met through history, there's some people that are just very happy with being at the bottom of the totem pole. I'll give you an example. When I was in high school, one of my friends came up to me one time and said, Mark, how do you get A's all the time on your test? And I say, well, I try to study at least 1 hour a night, even if I don't have homework. He's like, oh, I can't do that. I'm happy with my C minuses and my D pluses. I can't spend another hour. And I just want to add, there's some people that are completely happy with their lifestyle and they don't want to improve it. They, as you move up the food chain in life, getting higher paying jobs come with more stress and more headaches. And some people are completely happy working at McDonald's without having to go through those headaches.
So you don't buy the argument completely then that a lot of people would strive more along the lines that you're saying if they were given a more equal opportunity?
No,
some would, some wouldn't.
John? What's that?
I think what Mark, yeah, some would, some wouldn't. Who can say?
Well,
I mean, you're just hoping that you don't have a lot of people in misery where they get desperate and crime becomes appealing and they start preying upon it. We see this throughout the world. If you have people too far down and hopeless and in misery, then you have a lot of social problems. So
could any of the Republicans who are trying to block either of these nominations be considered anti-climate and also racist?
Well, we'd have to know who they were, what they said, what their motives are. But I don't think I'm not too interested in their motives one way or the other. We can judge their motives throughout their whole history of their political operations. I just think that when they're nominating people for the Federal Reserve, and you know how complicated these issues are that come before them, I think you want to get people who are at least demonstrably very smart in the area that the Federal Reserve was set out as its major responsibilities. So they should have proven experience and show their ability, their intelligence in some kind of way.
Yeah, in fact, considering the challenges and the complexity of the Federal Reserve, their mechanisms that they use to control the economy, Mark, you're saying that there's probably now, what, 4 rate hikes ahead, and that's going to have an effect on lending. It's going to have an effect on interest rates. It's going to have an effect on the economy, correct? What are the big challenges that either of these nominees would have to face?
Oh, well, just to add to that, before Jeremy Powell's last speech, it was 4 rate hikes. Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan now are shooting for a 7 or an 8 in rate hikes this year. And if you do that, that means basically you're going to have a rate hike to every meeting this year for the Federal Reserve, which I think is kind of excessive. But yeah, I think the goal of the Federal Reserve is to basically, it has 3 mandates: control inflation, work for full employment of the economy, and to intervene in when the financial markets become stressed. And what we've discussed here today doesn't sound like any one of those 3.
I was going to say, so while they're determining how many rate hikes they're going to have, not that they're going to be, they should also be concerned about climate change and racism.
Yeah.
They'd never get anything done. They'd be paralyzed, you know.
Well, let's shift a little bit of the focus still on the Federal Reserve, considering what the Federal Reserve has announced. What about Biden's touting an economic recovery? We're in the beginning of it and everything's rosy. Job numbers are good, strong economy, et cetera, et cetera. Pure baloney, Mark, or somewhat true?
You know, I'll have to use the old joke. There's 3 kind of lies. There's the regular lie, there's the damn lie, and then there's statistics. And I think the statistics is really coming into place here. I mean, when Biden came in, you had all these lockdowns. When these lockdowns started automatically dissipating because of the vaccines being rolled out, you naturally were going to see a huge increase in the employment rate. So I think he's touting something. It's kind of like if I got out here and said, hey, you're in darkness right now, but hey, come 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to make the sun come up. Do I really get credit for the sun coming up? You know, it's kind of like that.
And so a lot of these are previous jobs. They're not new jobs being created. They're previous jobs that people left, and now we're coming back to, correct?
Correct. Right now, there are 6 people unemployed that for every 10 job openings. So we have almost twice as many job openings as there are people unemployed. But a lot of people just don't want to go back to work. And like you said, if a person lost their job at McDonald's and now they're opening that McDonald's store back up because of the vaccine rollout, is that really a new job being created? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm afraid that I agree that there's a lot of hocus pocus going on because even today, while they're talking about this great opportunity, they're talking about, I can't remember the company is going to lay off 20% of its workforce. Maybe it was Peloton or something like that. They were just talking about that. And I know there are a lot of companies that are hurting because of not just demand, but also of this supply chain problems. There are many problems, structural problems in the economy. And I don't see this, I don't feel that people see a big booming or advancing kind of economy here. I think people are more really worried.
Well, I think, it's obvious that Biden is trying to pivot away from previous policy announcements that are not playing well with the public, and at least giving lip service and not much more to some of these positions now, where, for instance, he went to New York City to talk with the new mayor there and talk about cracking down on crime, but they're really not getting to the root problem there either, because they're still not prosecuting criminals. So, I mean, he's moving away from a lot of these positions that they know are getting flack, that he knows is dropping his ratings severely. But again, and this is a question I've asked Mark a number of times, will any of these moves be enough to get his ratings back up to an acceptable level before the midterm elections?
Well, I'll jump in on that. I'm going to say no. I just don't think he has enough timing. You got the inflation issue, which is going to have a drag on the economy. People paying. When the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, it pulls money out of people's pocket. Well, paying higher gas prices at the pump does the same thing. And now you're going to have these higher gas prices, and you're going to have the Fed raising interest rates. I just see more trouble for Joe Biden down the road.
Yeah, I don't. What concerns me most is that they will try to spark some other kind of military adventure to both, to prime the pump that way, which is I think the worst thing for our economy is to become dependent on, military adventures, because the domestic infrastructure and everything else gets put to the side. I mean, I'm very concerned that the Congress could come together and vote even beyond what the Pentagon asked for, and dump all that dough there, but it has a certain economic effect in certain places. And the country as a whole, education, healthcare, transportation, like roads and highways, I see all this stuff where I live getting worse and worse and worse. The living standards of the people. So yeah. I don't want him starting, and then he's over there strutting around. He was gonna, as if they're the champ. Every place they've gone, they bombed the hell out of this region and that region. They leave it a bigger mess than it was when they showed up, and they say they do it for democracy or stability. I don't know. It's I'd hate to see that happening.
Yeah, it's the wag the dog scenario. A lot of other presidents have used it when their ratings have been down. Now, it appears to me that I wonder whether the U.S. is actually trying to start a war between Ukraine and Russia. And
I'd say yes.
If that's the case,
yeah.
What's the benefit to the U.S.? Is it the defense contractors make more money? I mean, how would it benefit the U.S. to get a war going between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, defense contractors divert the attention of the people. The people tend to think, "Oh my God, we better not change horses in midstream," and all that kind of talk. So,
but Mark, the economic benefit to the U.S., is it just that the defense contractors that are in cahoots with the politicians that make more money, or is it more than that?
Well, I think it's really coming down to making money, but the only issue here is you have to pretty much go to like a full-scale war for defense contractors to make really good money. And I think a full-scale war with Russia, I think you're looking at something that's going to be on the same level as, maybe twice as bad as the Vietnam War if you get into that. So I find that kind of hard to see that. But the main thing here is I think Biden, Biden had such a bad Afghanistan withdrawal. He needs to score something on the foreign picture, because one of the things Obama said, he ran him as vice president because he knew so much about foreign policy, and so far as foreign policy has been the worst of any president out there, he needs a win on foreign policy, and he might be looking at the Ukraine thing to do it.
But he'll want proxies. I mean, I think the Brzezinski and Kissinger and those who are the architects of our policy, what they hope to do is just mainly arm someplace, sell arms to someplace, and send some other troops out, sacrifice a limited number of Americans who they don't give a damn about. They send 4,000 or 5,000 to get chewed up, and but they would just be arming Ukrainian and other kind of fighting forces.
Well, and not to mention, technically the Ukraine is basically Russia in my book. I mean, it's kind of like, in World War II when after World War I, they took part of Germany and gave that, turned it into like Czechoslovakia. And that was one of the things Hitler ran on, was those are our people. Well, the Ukrainian people, I have a feeling if you go in the Ukraine, you're going to see a lot more Ukrainians, fight for the Russian side than fight for the Ukrainian side.
Well, what effect would that, if it gets into that kind of a war and it gets big, and hopefully it stays conventional rather than nuclear, what kind of effect would that have, other than getting Biden's approval ratings up, rallying around the commander-in-chief, rallying around the flag? Other than that, would it have any benefit for the U.S. economy?
I don't think it would. You'd see a boost in defense contractors, but unless it goes to full-scale war and you crank up the industrial complex like a Vietnam War or World War II, I don't think it's going to have that big of an impact.
Could our defense contractors be feeding foreign troops rather than getting American troops involved? Like in Vietnam, there was so much money made in Vietnam among the defense contractors. So this time it wouldn't be American troops, but it would be feeding all the allied troops over there. Would that happen?
It could be that with NATO. That's a good point. It could be that as well. Or, with if you go back to Afghanistan, Afghanistan in the short term was not a really big win for defense contractors. However, because the stuff in Vietnam had gone on Afghanistan had gone on for 20-something years, it stretched out a small amount of money over a multitude of years, and it turned into a big chunk of money. Not to mention, I have a strong feeling Afghanistan was probably used to test a lot of next generation weapon systems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. I think the big thing that's going on in Ukraine is that Nord Stream 2, the big oil companies, the OPEC and the others, they don't want any kind of competitor to have a big market in the middle of Europe. So I think that's their main target, is to try to stop the pipeline that Russia is going to set up with Germany. And that's the number one target, I believe. I think that's behind the whole thing.
Can Arab oil supply Germany and the other European nations if the pipeline stops?
Well, maybe for short hauls, the U.S. and some others, I think they're willing to countenance any kind of misery if they can knock out a competitor in the oil area.
Do you see it that way, Mark?
I would agree with that.
So because I don't see why Germany doesn't want to go along with this, because they're depending on Russian oil, correct?
They don't want to, but they may. But the thing is, of course, who knows what kind of pressures of every kind, financial, commercial, whatever, behind the scenes, that they threaten to use if someone doesn't knuckle under. Your economy can be damaged even just for a short. You're the administration of Germany, and they say we can do stuff that's going to hurt your economy for maybe 6 or 7 months. Maybe you come out of it, but are you going to be able to take that? You might be out of office.
Yeah,
might knock you out of office.
Well, just wrapping it up now. So in terms of these Federal Reserve candidates, neither of you see them as contributing anything really legitimate in terms of expanding the U.S. economy with the philosophies they have, one in terms of race, the other in terms of climate change. So you both agree that, considering their orientation, if that's what they use to guide their decisions in the Federal Reserve, it's not going to have a beneficial effect on the U.S. economy.
Well, I think they're just running their mouths. I don't think, if they knew how to do these great things for the U.S. economy, I think we would have heard about them doing something even before. I think this is just, it's their PR, their own self-promotion. They got their pet projects, but they could, what do they know? What do they know how to do?
Mark?
I would agree with that. Rarely do you see somebody in one of those positions that really know what they're doing. If you're in the Federal Reserve, really what you're there for is you want kind of the spotlight, you want the fame, you kind of want the power. But if you really, really know what you're doing, you don't work in the Federal Reserve. You work at Goldman Sachs, you run a hedge fund or something like that, because you really, really understand the dynamics of how the economy works, and you know how to make a lot more money off of it.
Right.
That's very interesting. That's the first analysis I've heard like that. So in other words, the Federal Reserve board members are really figureheads or political fund positions, et cetera, but they're not the guys that are really in the know. Not even the chairman, not even like Jerome Powell.
Well, that was just like, back here in 2008, when the global economy was melting down, they started calling hedge fund managers that really knew how the economy worked and started asking them their advice on how to fix the economy. And, you could say that was insider trading, because we're like, I think you guys should buy, all this subprime mortgage bonds. Oh, wow. Guess what those hedge fund managers did the second they left that office, when they said, oh, we're going to throw $100 billion at subprime.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Well,
Yeah.
we had on another note of political absurdity concerning the economy.
There are countries like China, say for hundreds and hundreds of years, they had this huge bureaucracy with, all people want to do is be plugged in higher in that bureaucracy, and then shuffle the papers. Well, a lot of these jobs are like that. The salaries are huge. Like it beats work. They show up in the office, they have all sorts of perks. It's like all these university presidents that are on the board of 6 or 7 different corporations, each one paying $50,000, $60,000. And they just try to, where's the meeting going to be? Some lush place. Yeah. So they're eating, they're drinking, they're.
Oh, just to add to that, I'm sure, Nancy Pelosi talks about, all this green technology and stuff, but didn't we just see her private airline bill here last week, $500,000 for flying a private jet? Talk about burning some fossil fuels.
Yeah, that's where that's what those people are into.
Yeah, they like the power. They're not these people that are what they call leaders today in politics. If you put them 2,000 years ago and they were like going up against people like Caesar or Napoleon, it would be a real true Game of Thrones. And Nancy Pelosi and all these people would just be, dead.
Well, guys, I guess that'll
be a good movie.
Yeah.
You got to have a time machine movie and send some of these aces from here back there. Oh, God.
Hey, guys, thanks for joining us. It was
okay.
All
right.
Entertaining.
See you. Nice to meet you, Mark.
We'll be back at it again.
Hope we do this again.
John Woodford and Mark Collinsworth. Thanks very much. And out there, we'll see you again. Hope you.
Yeah. Thank you.